It's a question that's going to be asked repeatedly perhaps this year, especially in the context of what's been happening between India and the US president over the last few days and the last few weeks. Donald Trump, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, all of it throwing up a big question. Can India trust President Donald Trump? Now, the India-US relationship is a very strong one. It has always enjoyed a great deal of continuity. But now there are questions over whether India needs to recalibrate and prepare for the next steps in the world of Trump. And someone who understands these things perhaps better, actually not even perhaps, definitely better than most, I know, is Dr. Ashley J. Tellis. He's Tata Chair for Strategic Affairs at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. His is a voice that anyone who's important listens to in the world of international security, defense, and Asian strategic issues. A voice that is heard above all others by lawmakers, the leadership on issues of US-India relations, and zooming in, of course, to the whole Trump-Modi dynamic. Dr. Tellis, so good to see you. Thank you very much for your time here on NDTV. I want to start with the very specific because we're talking about Modi-Trump because yesterday was a day full of events. There was a 35-minute phone call, which I'm sure you've heard about, while Prime Minister Modi was at the G7 and Trump had dialed him. Shortly thereafter, there was a lunch that the US president held for Pakistan's army chief. But I want to ask you first about that lunch for the Pakistan army chief, that came yesterday and became a huge talking point. What did that look like to you?
I think it was the president's personal decision to host the lunch. I'm not quite sure there was a universal consensus within his own administration on the wisdom of doing this. But President Trump is, as we know, an eclectic personality. He fancies himself a peacemaker. He genuinely believes that during the most recent India-Pakistan crisis, his administration and he himself personally had a very important role to play in the making of the ceasefire. And so I think he saw the lunch with General Munir, Field Marshal Munir, as an opportunity to sort of build on what he believes he achieved. And the reason why I think he invited the Prime Minister was this hope, this fanciful hope, that they could all three be at a table together. They could hash out all the outstanding issues, and that he would come out at the end of it burnished in his reputation as a peacemaker.
Because this lunch that the president had with General Field Marshal Munir, Dr. Tellis, was, after that 35-minute phone call where the Indian Prime Minister is said to have very clearly stated that the ceasefire after Operation Sindoor was something that India had achieved by virtue of its military actions, and it had nothing to do with trade deals or mediation, and that India didn't need any mediation. And a short while thereafter, you saw Trump pretty much owning that ceasefire once again and saying, this was all me. What did you think of that? Again, brand Trump signature. This is the world of Trump. This is how he operates.
I think this is in many ways vintage President Trump, right? I think the Prime Minister made a very compelling argument, and I think the diplomatic record will bear that out, that a substantial element of the success of the ceasefire were the back-channel conversations between the Indian government through its military officials and the Pakistani government through Pakistani military officials. The US did play a role. Certainly, I think Secretary Rubio was a very, very useful interlocutor to both sides. But for us to claim credit that this was somehow magically, our contribution, I think exaggerates our role. But, you can't keep a good man down, and you can't keep President Trump from his very strongly held beliefs about his own role in the matter. So I think even though the Prime Minister really attempted to walk him through the sequence of events, I'm not sure it is going to have a lasting impact.
How should India interpret this then, in your view, Dr. Tellis, that India has repeatedly, diplomatically, via the Prime Minister as well, made it clear that it does not support this idea that it was the United States or Trump himself who was responsible for this ceasefire, but for Trump to continuously repeat that remark, because it may be one small thing, but it's very important from India's perspective, given what a big deal Operation Sindoor was.
Absolutely. So I think you have to go back to the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are what you alluded to in your introductory remarks. First, the US-India relationship is generally in a very good place. And we should avoid doing anything that makes the current scratchiness into a permanent feature of the relationship. I think that is not helpful either to India or the United States. Two, we have to recognize the eccentricities of President Trump's personality and his worldview. And, take him seriously, as they say, but not literally. Recognize that he does want to play the role of a peacemaker, even though the United States as a country at this moment is singularly, not suited for playing that role. And so I think it is useful for India to continue to emphasize that a third-party mediation is not required, that the two countries, India and Pakistan, are entirely capable of handling these matters on their own.
Yes.
And continue to engage the administration more widely beyond the president on a range of issues that currently are very important to both sides. And I would focus on economics, and in particular the trade negotiations, which have been going actually reasonably well.
Yes.
I would focus on putting together the building blocks for enhanced defense cooperation. And I would focus on how the two countries can work together in other parts of the world. Yeah. And those are things that are of common interest. And I think that's really the way forward, especially in these tumultuous times when you cannot really, rely on political personalities, in a sense, to deliver what is necessary for both sides.
It's interesting, Dr. Tellis, that you say, don't take him seriously, but don't take him literally. That's a hugely useful advice, which I'm sure the Indian Foreign Office has calibrated itself to deploy from the first presidential term of Trump, and this one much more so given the size of his mandate as well. But in this particular case, and just to close this part of the discussion on India-Pakistan relations, is there going to be a meeting point? Do you see more frictions between India and Trump on the issue of India-Pakistan relations, given that Trump has insisted on constantly hyphenating, saying, both sides are excellent and both sides are my good friends, and he clearly has a personal belief that he wants to make some kind of a grand achievement as far as achieving peace on his watch?
I think, that kind of a posture certainly has the potential to increase the anxieties and the irritations in New Delhi. That is simply baked into the character of Trump's approach to this problem. The important thing, I think, is for India not to get derailed by what are essentially strategic distractions. And Trump's current approach in his diplomacy to India and Pakistan, I would put in the category of strategic distractions. So focus on the fundamentals. Let's build on what we've achieved. And, just remember one thing. At the end of the day, Trump is still a one-term president.
Yeah.
We have to look at putting in place the foundations that will outlast him and not necessarily be derailed by responding to every one of his tweets or every one of his claims.
Indeed. I mean, he is a one-term president, Dr. Tellis, but, there are a good number of years left of the President Trump 2.0 term. Do you see any other major turbulence between the two sides? Moving on from the India-Pakistan issue, that's closed. We've heard your view on that. But there are very substantive discussions on these issues of trade, for instance, where there is potential for turbulence. Once again, because of Trump's brand of extreme positions, trying to pin down the other side, not really in the mood to negotiate, not really in the spirit of it being a two-way conversation, my way or the highway kind of approach. Do you see the possibility of more turbulence in this relationship?
I mean, there is certainly a chance that what we've achieved in the trade negotiations so far is not brought to a happy conclusion. And that may simply be because at the end of the day, the president believes that what India has put on the table is not enough. I don't think that is the view of the US negotiators who are engaged in these conversations. They have been deeply impressed by how seriously India has approached the trade negotiation, the kinds of positions India has taken in order to reach an agreement. But at the end of the day, it is still the president's call, right? So there is a small chance that these things could still, become problems. But I'm hopeful that as these negotiations continue, we can bring at least the first interim agreement to a successful conclusion. That buys us time because it takes India out of the current penalty box that it is in right now because of US trade policy. And it creates some room for us to think about the bigger question. And the bigger question is, what kind of a larger trading relationship can India and the United States have? That is not something we can fix in 3 months. It's certainly not something we can fix before July. But that's really where most of our attention will be focused on if we can deliver an interim agreement to the president that he's satisfied with.
People-to-people ties between the two countries, the business relationship has always been something that has, outlasted dispensations and administrations, Dr. Tellis. One particular area of friction in the last few weeks, months have been the issue of visas. Whether it comes to the H-1B visas, whether it comes to green cards, whether it comes to most particularly student visas recently. These are all, of course, underpinned by domestic political considerations and decisions taken by Trump personally and his advisors. Could these things get worse? Because these are substantive parts of the relationship.
I fear there is always that danger. No one is going to defend the right of illegal Indian immigrants to stay in the United States, right? I mean, the Indian government has not done that. The US government is well within its rights to ask people who have outlived their permissions to stay to leave. But the larger question really is, how do we think about the mobility of our peoples across our borders? And this is where, to be very candid, I think the United States is on the cusp of making a very big mistake. Because we have thrived, we have benefited from being an open society which has been welcoming of foreigners, of immigrants to the United States. It is really in many ways the secret sauce of American power. But the Trump administration has a very different view. They really want to walk back the clock on openness to immigration in ways that are quite unprecedented, in recent times. And there is a danger that India, like many other countries, will be affected, by these strictures, which are now sort of being institutionalized. But most important of all, and this is what I care deeply about, is that it weakens the United States as we pursue these policies. So yes, the near-term challenge is a bilateral, crisis of some sort. But the longer-term problem is that we weaken our capacity to build our own power by relying on the talents of people who live outside our borders. And on this count, the US-India relationship has been a stunning success over the last 30 years. So why would we be deliberately looking to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs? I mean, again, as you know well, Shiv, I mean, this goes back to the tumultuous domestic politics in the United States. And until we settle these issues among ourselves, I fear that many other countries will become collateral damage.
Dr. Tellis, coming now to another area that I know you're looking at very closely, it is what's happening between Iran and Israel right now. The US president has made it more than clear that there could be some kind of an intervention. There's talk of, large-scale, strikes where the United States might actually assist Israel as well. How are you reading what the next steps may actually look like?
Well, it has become very clear that Israel has achieved remarkable successes in the campaign so far. But it has not been able to neutralize completely
Yeah.
Iran's capacity to build a nuclear weapon at some point in the future, were it to so choose. There are deeply buried underground Iranian facilities that have proved to be immune to Israeli military action so far. So the question facing the United States now is, should we enter this conflict and help Israel finish the job? Or do we stay this one out in the hope that the damage that Israel has done so far is sufficient to bring Iran to the negotiating table once again? And we really push hard on a solution through negotiations. That's really the question that Donald Trump faces. So that's a strategic question. Do you join in a war, help Israel finish the job, but then earn the eternal enmity of the Iranian people? Or do you sort of sit on the sidelines, hope that the Israeli military action has pushed the Iranians to negotiation, which they claim they are willing to do, ask the Israelis or lean on the Israelis for a pause until we can test out Iranian intentions, and then hope that we can get an outcome through a negotiation that is favorable for all concerned? Then there is a domestic political problem, right? Because Trump campaigned and became president on the premise that we would not be involved in foreign wars. I don't think he likes the prospect of getting involved in a conflict with Iran. It has the potential of splitting his base very dramatically among those who believe this is a great opportunity to destroy the Iranian program and even the regime once and for all, and others who are fearful of another Iraq-like, adventure, which then costs us another 20 years in terms of American blood and treasure. So I don't envy the position that he is in, but if he makes the wrong choice, we will be saddled with crises at both ends, because there is a risk that at the end of the day, the Iranians will say, we have to move to a weapons program. And that is one consequence. And the other consequence, of course, is that the Iranians come to the negotiating table, string out a negotiation, and we never get a successful conclusion.
Which appears to be the case right now, because, just as we began this broadcast, Dr. Tellis, Reuters reports that about 400 missiles just lifted off from Iran and were heading towards Israel in what is, I'm guessing, the 11th or the 12th such salvo in the last few days. So as far as, Iran being in a mood to negotiate right now, at least for the moment, that doesn't appear to be the case, though, of course, these things change dramatically in a hot war scenario of this kind. Do you see this accelerating a decision from President Trump?
I think, there are two issues involved here, right? The Iranians, at least so far, seem to have conceptually made the distinction between the Israelis and the United States.
Yeah.
So they know that they are fighting a war with Israel, but they have been careful to keep open doors with respect to the United States. Now, depending on how this latest episode of conflict sort of plays out, the real question is going to be the same one that we discussed a few minutes ago facing President Trump. Does he join this conflict or does he sit this one out? My fear is that, we've got bad choices at both ends of this equation.
Very true. And, I did want to bring up Russia and Ukraine as well, but that is so much of a longer conversation. I thought I'll leave it right to the end. But I did want to squeeze in China because, how can we not bring China up? Your reading, Dr. Tellis, especially in the last few weeks, of how President Trump has engaged China. He's said very nice, polite things about Xi Jinping in the middle of a hot trade negotiation there. Things have sort of cooled down a little as far as the conversation is concerned. It's all very unpredictable. But how do you see that relationship? Because that really is the great game.
I'm glad you asked about this, Shiv, because to my mind, that is the central question going forward,
Yeah.
right? What is China's trajectory in global politics? What is its relationship to the United States? And what are the implications of both those questions for the global community? I fear that even on this one, Trump is actually more iconoclastic than people realize.
Yeah.
That his administration may have anti China impulses in their DNA. But Trump thinks of China primarily as a trade problem and not as a strategic problem. And because he thinks of it as a trade problem, his inclination is to try and find a deal with the Chinese that somehow makes the trade problem go away.
Yeah.
Now, I don't believe that even the trade problem will go away if we get a successful deal with China. But leave that aside for the moment. Let's assume we get a trade deal that is satisfactory to Trump. Then I think we might find ourselves in a very awkward position where we begin to think that the China problem, quote unquote, essentially disappears
Yeah.
because we've now got a new modus vivendi on trade. And all the larger issues which are connected to China's rise, China's challenge to American primacy globally, China's security interests in the Indo-Pacific, all those issues get moved to the sidelines because the president is very satisfied that he's got a big, beautiful deal with Xi Jinping. And so I am deeply worried about the course of US-China relations because after all the efforts that have been made in the last several years to think seriously about competition with China for the first time,
Yeah.
we could be on the cusp of simply walking away from that inherited shift, simply because the president is transfixed by trade problems to the neglect of everything else.
That's an incredibly useful perspective, and you're right. I don't think most people see it that way at all, and that in many ways explains some of the things he's saying and some of the decisions he's taken vis-a-vis China. My final question to you, Dr. Tellis, and I wish we had more time because I do have so many questions, but my final question to you would be about Putin. About the Trump-Putin dynamic and where you think that's actually going. That's seen some unpredictability as well. People have seen, friendship. They've seen cordiality between the two leaders. They've also seen Trump being quite embarrassed by the manner in which the war took a devastating turn recently with what Ukraine did deep inside Russia and Russia's potential response as well. Your view on the Trump-Putin dynamic and what you think it's going to yield next.
So it's really hard to get a good fix on what Trump actually thinks of Putin. He certainly tends to give him the benefit of the doubt on all the big issues that divide the United States and Russia. And that is somewhat unsettling.
Yeah.
In his own, in the recesses of his consciousness, I think he genuinely believes that Ukraine is the author of its own misfortunes, that it's Ukraine that has brought about the Russian invasion of their country. And therefore, he tends to look at Putin and Russia more generally with more forgiving eyes than I think is simply warranted by the facts. Now, unfortunately for Trump, I think Putin has really no interest in the kind of ceasefire that Trump was hoping that Putin would agree to. But he is willing to become party to what is essentially an empty process of negotiation.
Yeah.
With the objective of essentially stringing this negotiation out long enough so that he can achieve his military aims on the battlefield. So the idea of a negotiation with Ukraine right now is really aimed more at the United States than Kiev.
Yeah.
It's aimed at keeping Trump in good humor. It's aimed at keeping Trump essentially on the sidelines, on splitting the Western coalition, which is arrayed against Russia, and hoping that while he achieves all these objectives, he can make significantly important military gains that then confronts Kyiv with essentially with no choice, but to simply live with the fact that it has lost territory and lost substantial elements of its sovereignty.
And I'll end this interview where I began it, Dr. Tellis, with the India-US relationship. No doubt you know that this weekend, Sunday, after a couple of postponements, an Indian astronaut is going to be on board the Axiom 4 mission that heads to the International Space Station. We're all looking forward to that. Would you agree that this is a reminder that, you know, beyond all the bluster and the frictions that we often see in diplomacy between the two countries, even two big friends like India and the United States, there is this very substantive, close relationship at so many levels?
Absolutely. I mean, I always keep saying that in many ways, the United States and India are fated, to be good partners. The only uncertainty to my mind is whether they can be great partners, right? And I think both sides have to do some soul searching in terms of how they approach the other.
Yeah.
Because if we get this right, we can really do something very good for ourselves and for, stability in the global system. But I do not want to underestimate the landmines, that lie along the way. And what you've seen in the last few weeks is a very cautionary reminder about these perpetual landmines which haven't disappeared.
On that sobering note, we'll end this very illuminating interview. Thank you very much, Dr. Tellis. All the very best, and grateful for your time here on NDTV, helping us demystify, navigate, and understand one of the intriguing relationships, perhaps, of our time. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.